Testing 1, 2.
I'm Russell Pounds. I'm an extension economist here at Iowa State University. And my topic today for the lecture series is integration or separation. Is there a choice? Now, my argument is based upon the fact that I think integration has been a failure up until now. So you can see which direction this is going to take us. The push for racial equality through integration has been a massive failure. Despite some gains, the masses of black people are no better off than they were during the 60s. In fact, some of us are even worse off. Now, that is a pretty strong statement. And what evidence is there to support such a claim? Let us first examine the state of integration today. And I think first we ought to go into what we mean by integration. Webster says, for example, to integrate is to unite with something else or to form into a whole. Incorporation is equals into society or an organization of individuals or different groups, such as races. Now, this is what the dictionary has to say about integration. Now, the definition itself implies that separation exists. In fact, the Kerner Commission stated, quote, that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black and one white, end of quote. I don't think there's much argument that from the beginning of this nation, the two races have been separate. In fact, it took some time before blacks were even considered to be legal persons. The Constitution itself, even that noble-sounding document, is a racist document written by white men for other white men. I should say that it is a racist, male, chauvinistic document because women were not considered in the first editions of that document. In fact, it's only been 50 years since women had the right to vote, so women were excluded from the concepts that were first laid out in the Constitution. But getting back to the topic of the moment, integration, what has it meant in practice? It has meant, for the most part, blacks changing and whites remaining the same. For example, integrated schooling has meant black children leaving neighborhood schools and going to all-white schools. Integrated housing has meant blacks moving from all-black neighborhoods into previously all-white neighborhoods. Integrated churches has meant blacks quitting their all-black churches and joining all-white ones. Now, why is this never the other way around? The answer goes right to the heart of the problem. And it is this. It is the attitude that all black is inferior to all white. It is, in the words of James Baldwin, the basic belief that if the black man is not inferior, then the white man is not superior. Lerone Bennett, an editor of Everyday Magazine, tells of speaking to a group of white radical ministers in Atlanta, Georgia, who complained about the self-segregation of blacks in the churches. They said, they will not abandon their churches and integrate with us. Mr. Bennett told them that the best Baptist church in Atlanta at that time was pastored by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and they agreed. He then suggested that all white Baptists should leave their inferior second-class white churches and integrate Dr. King's church. It is reported that their mouths flew open in amazement. I think this is descriptive of the reaction we would find in similar situations. Other contributing factors to the difficulties of integration are the legal and institutional barriers imposed. In some cases, these are straw men that are raised expediently. At other times, the barriers are very real. Education is a prime example of this. The hopes of many of us were raised to great heights with the 1954 Supreme Court decision on school desegregation. 18 years later, about the most I can say for it that the dual school system is no longer legal. De facto segregation, if I may be permitted a pun, is a fact of life all over this land. During this period of all kinds of strategies, subterfuges, and straw men, all sorts of things have been utilized to prevent what the court said should happen. For example, some states closed their public schools. Some states converted their public schools to private schools. Some districts maintain segregation through segregated floors, segregated rooms, and segregated classes. Black teachers and administrators were found not to be qualified and were discharged by the thousands. In fact, there are court suits being pursued today to reinstitute black teachers in the educational systems throughout the South. Busing is the latest straw man to be raised, and he is yet to be knocked down. Now let's discuss the busing issue a little. This is an issue that has allowed white teachers, white administrators, and white school board members a chance to cop out on addressing the real problems of education. They don't know how to provide quality education to other than white middle-class youngsters, and there is some doubt about the ability there. There is at least a little bit of evidence that white middle-class youngsters learn in spite of the system rather than because of it. Those who push for busing are saying, in effect, the reason that the educational quality is low in the inner city schools is the children. All we have to do is move these children around to other schools and they will get a better education. I think that is absolute nonsense. Children in inner city schools are getting a lousy education or no education because the present system just doesn't know how to deal with these students. Moving them around without radically changing the system cannot possibly solve the problem. I find myself on the side of those who are opposed to busing, for far different reasons, of course, and I believe more black people are reaching the same conclusion that I have reached. I have come to the conclusion that white people can no longer be trusted to be in charge of the education of black children. That includes teachers, administrators, and policymakers. Now that probably sounds like an extreme statement, but let's look at what is going on. Study after study has documented the fact that what passes for an education in most inner city schools is of low quality. The system has responded by offering Head Start, reduced class size, program enrichment, busing, and other Band-Aid type approaches, but always within the framework of the established system and always failing to accomplish very much in the way of solving the problem. Some of these so-called innovations cost enormous sums of money. The projected cost of busing as a means of achieving racial balance in every school district in the country is almost incalculable, and it stands to reason that the taxpayers are going to resist it with all their might. The tragic part is that this money is sorely needed to do other things in most school systems. Since none of the aforementioned approaches have worked very well, we need something far different. My prescription is that black parents should be given control of their children's education. Black administrators should be hired and be responsible to offer education as prescribed by black policymakers. I assure you that Little Coco and the Preacher's Watermelon would not be on the required reading list, such as happened in the Waterloo school system not too long ago. Some of you, no doubt, are wondering, where do we get all of these black teachers and administrators? Well, I think we have to do like the white community did when there weren't a sufficient number of qualified white teachers. A lower standard was accepted until such time as the standards could be raised. As a matter of fact, there are still many white teachers in Iowa today holding teacher credentials who are without college degrees. In fact, there are at least 2 districts where none of the teachers in the elementary system have a bachelor's degree. So, what we're suggesting is not something that is very radical or out of the ordinary. I have no doubt that such a change would be far better than what we have now, where hundreds of thousands of black youngsters are not being prepared to live in and compete in a world that is growing smaller and becoming more complex with each passing day. The conditions that make it impossible for black children to get a quality education are not isolated. They operate in other areas of our society also. It was the conclusion of the Kerner Commission that the most worrisome problem of our society is racism, or more specifically, white racism. Another term for white racism is white supremacy, which probably communicates more and helps us understand why whites don't want to change the status quo. After all, it is a comfortable position to be in. It It has brought enormous economic benefits, social benefits, and psychological benefits. Why give any of that up? Of course, no one thinks of it in those terms, or more correctly, people have rationalized away the unpleasant aspects of how and why they got where they are. Society is geared to help you do this. Schools contribute to this by how and what they teach, what they require students to read, and other subtleties. Voltaire is supposed to have said that history is a fable agreed upon, and to that I say amen. If racism is at the root of our societal problems, let us examine it in as much depth as we can in the time available. What do we mean by racism? A simplified definition is the belief in the superiority of the white race over any other race of people. A white racist would be one who actively or passively pursued a way of life personifying that belief. Now, most people can get around that sort of oversimplification because they never commit overt acts of racism. But let us divide racism into three parts: cultural racism, individual racism, and institutional racism, and see how you can fare with these kind of criteria. First, let us look at cultural racism. Cultural racism is that imposed by books, movies, magazines, radio, TV, and so forth. All of these to some extent have contributed to forming our opinions about groups of people. The textbook world of our school system is a good example of what I mean. With few exceptions, they ignore black people, red people, and any other color except white. A curriculum specialist of the Chicago public school system has this to say: the child is given books to read and study, films to observe, concepts to be understood and learned, in which all the necessary heroic and functioning people are white, with not even a suggestion that this view of our society is totally unrealistic. This symbolic nightmare envelops a child in the first grade and presses against his brain throughout his educational career. Of crucial importance in this connection are the omissions and distortions of social science and history textbooks. Several studies point out that blacks do not exist in some textbooks. Some books do not mention blacks after the Civil War. Others do not mention blacks in any connection. The authors of these books must know that there are blacks in America and have been for over 300 years. How must a black child feel when he has completed the assigned course of United States history and in it found not one word of credit, not one word of favorable comment for even one among the millions of his forefathers who have lived through nearly 3 centuries of this country's history? How must an American Indian child feel when he is taught Columbus discovered America in 1492? Historians and publishers are at work trying to correct some of these distortions and omissions, but there is still much to be done. In fact, the last couple of sessions of the Iowa legislature, bills have been introduced to require black history as part of the curriculum of the Iowa public schools. So far, it has not been passed, but at least there's well, I shouldn't say at least, an effort has been made. This is just a fact. An effort has been made to get this to be a requirement. A study of the movies and TV shows produced before 1960 would give the same kind of evidence. This is something you can check out for yourself. There are many old movies and old TV shows that provide such an opportunity. Now, this kind of situation is unhealthy for both black and white Americans because we can't know much about one another unless what we see and what we read depicts life the way it really is in this country. This is a multiracial society. It's not of one race, and yet what has happened in the schools and in the other magazines and books and TV, although it has not always been portrayed as a one race society, the white race has always been portrayed as the dominant race. And I think this is what makes it very difficult to change. Another example of cultural racism is embodied in the language. Language, we have learned from philosophers and social scientists, acts as a lens or filter that helps sort out and evaluate our experiences. Words are not neatly definable. They carry with them multiple meanings which shade off into each other. As such, some words have emotional content that is not always easy to specify. Two such words are black and white. Whiteness is celebrated as good, while blackness is castigated as bad. To test this observation, try to think of derogatory uses of white. White lie? No. A white lie is an acceptable lie. To whitewash an issue? Again, to whitewash something is to make a bad situation acceptable by making it white. Now, what about good uses of black? I can think of several. Financial books in the black, but in this instance, black is opposed to red, not white. Black soil is another, but this is used in a descriptive sense and not a metaphorical sense. But I can think of a lot of negative uses of black. To blackball a person, a gloomy future looks black, a bad lie is a black lie, blacken one's name is to give him a bad name, and so forth. Positive uses of white produces a similarness. To become pure is to become white as snow. Angels are white. The white hat special is a good bargain. The guys in the white hats are the good guys, and we could go on and on. Here again is an opportunity to make personal observations. Examine how you yourself use these words in similar terms, how your friends use them, and see if there are these hidden connotations that don't appear to be bad on the surface, but when you look at what they mean to other people, you might get a different opinion. Let's look next at institutional racism. This again is subtle in practice, but has far-reaching effects. What we mean in this instance is any well-established, habitual, or widely accepted pattern of action or organizational arrangement, whether formal or informal. For example, the residential segregation of almost all blacks in the cities of America is institutional racism. And of course, all sorts of things follow from that. Banks participate by not financing homes for blacks in other than segregated areas. Real estate firms will only offer homes for sale to blacks in these same areas. Government agencies like the Federal Housing Administration and the Veterans Administration will only insure loans on homes purchased in these areas. We end up with a segregated school system as a result of these segregated housing patterns. One can say, well, I still don't participate in that kind of racism. But as long as these practices are condoned by society, and they are, everyone supports them, if even only by inaction. And more importantly, everyone is going to have to pay the bill one of these days when all of these youngsters who are not getting an education today become uneducated adults. What about individual racism? Stated previously, most people think of racism in terms of individual behavior. They think of someone burning a cross on someone's lawn, throwing garbage on someone's grass, or name-calling. Actually, these kinds of acts, although they create tension, are far less harmful than the effects of cultural or institutional racism, which permeates the entire white society, consciously as well as subconsciously. Having described the problem, what can we say about some of the motivating factors that makes the white majority difficult to change? I have said that the white majority gets economic benefits from maintaining the status quo. For example, the ratio of black to white family income, although it rose in the late 1960s to the highest on record, it was still only 60% of that of the white. The 1970 census shows that black family income is equal to that of white families for those under 35, but only where the black husband and wife both work. In other words, it takes two of them to make that income equal to white family income. So there's still a big gap as far as income is concerned. In addition to that direct sort of inequality, we have blacks occupying the low-level, unskilled, low-paying jobs, as well as a much higher rate of unemployment, which helps to account for making it very difficult to break out of this cycle. I also mentioned there are psychological and social benefits accruing from maintaining the status quo, and these again are very difficult to measure. But here are some insights about these too. For example, the social clubs, which limit their memberships to male Caucasians, are getting some psychological and social benefits from this sort of restriction. The restrictive covenants and deeds of conveyances had and still have that effect. There are people and names with restrictive covenants in their deeds and who still believe they are valid. When I came here in 1962 with my family, one of the things that was put in front of us, well, we can't sell you this house or we can't rent you this house because our deed says this house can only be rented or conveyed to persons of the white race. Well, this particular bit of illegality was declared unconstitutional back in 1948 by the Supreme Court, but a lot of people still don't know that and are still living under the misapprehension that those whites-only clauses in their deeds are still valid. The trade unions which practice discrimination get economic as well as psychological benefits from their exclusionary practices. It is ironic that prior to the Civil War and right afterward, the blacks were the skilled worker and artisans of the day. Some of the skilled carpentry work done on the old homes in the South cannot be duplicated today by the present-day white carpenters. Where does this lead us? What I've been trying to convey is that integration has failed because of white racism. Whites just don't want to give up the economic, psychological, and social benefits the practice of racism has obtained from them. Further, that these discriminatory practices have become so institutionalized and so much a part of the culture that the white majority can engage in the practice of racism without any feeling of guilt or wrongdoing. Integration has failed also because it has meant that it had to come at the sufferance of the white majority. In other words, blacks have no inherent right to an integrated society, but can only have it if the white majority says it's okay. All of this guarantees failure, and that is what we have. Massive failure of a noble idea. Now, what is the next step? What is the case for separation? Because this is what I said my topic was going to be about. Do we have a choice between integration or separation? I've tried to convey my ideas on integration that has been a failure. Let me say a few things about separation. As I mentioned in the first part of this talk, although we do have a separate society at the present time, that is not the kind of separatism that we are talking about. Some blacks are urging a rejection of the white culture altogether and building on the broad cultural base bequeathed to us by our forebears. Others, like the black Muslims and citizens of the Republic of New Africa, insist on some sort of geographical separation from whites. Some blacks are demanding territory to be theirs exclusively. Some are advocating that this territory be away from the continental United States. Others demand territory within the continental United States. For example, one plan is that the southeastern part of the U.S. be turned over to black people. The white people be required to move, and then all the black people move in. Personally, I think that's impractical, but this is what some people are advocating. Regardless of the form that separatism takes, the basic problem is power and the ability to determine one's own destiny. For this, as mentioned, has been the fatal defect of the push for integration. Blacks must obtain and exercise economic, political, and social power. I think this is what was meant by black power when that term came into vogue a few years ago. And it seemed to me that at that particular time, just the use of that term frightened a lot of people. And that, in fact, it's no longer used today for some reason, but this is the kind of power that was being advocated in those days, that blacks must in some way obtain economic, political, and social power. And that way have more to say about how their own lives are going to go. Some people argue that the separatist movement is a step backwards, defeatist, and another form of racism, black racism. But we already have separation today and have had from the very beginning. and what we have is separation without power. Some, like Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, believe strongly that this is the wrong course. He and others like him assume that integration brings physical proximity, which causes whites to recognize the humanity of blacks, which leads to white persons accepting and liking black people. I'm sure that this occurs and that it isn't particularly rare. There are far more examples, however, to show that some of those having the most contact with black people are often the most racist. White policemen assigned to the ghetto, white teachers in all black schools, white welfare workers in black neighborhoods. And these are all good examples of those who work very closely with blacks, but yet have a very low opinion of the same people that they are in close contact with on a daily basis. I have a son who worked on the auto assembly lines in Detroit, where black and white worked side by side every day. He often stated the tension was so thick you could feel it, with it often erupting into violent verbal and physical confrontations. There's a saying often stated in jest that describes this problem of the proximity of the races. In the North, whites don't care how big blacks get as long as they don't get too close. In the South, whites don't care how close blacks get as long as they don't get too big. I think that goes a long way towards explaining what the problem is. I'm not claiming that the push for integration didn't do some good. Martin Luther King made a tremendous impact on both black and white Americans. His willingness to deliberately break laws he thought were unjust and then go to jail was a great psychological uplift to blacks who, though hating and despising the injustice of the Jim Crow laws, reluctantly obeyed them. The NAACP, CORE, the Urban League, and other groups made significant contributions to the improvement of race relations in the 60s. My argument is that ultimately integration didn't work, and the hope for it working in the future is very dim indeed. Blacks must come to grips with the means of obtaining power. If it wasn't clear before, it is perfectly clear today, if I may coin a phrase. White people are not going to give up anything willingly, for this is what it comes to. If blacks are to have more power, whites will have to have less power. And that is a crunch, a grinding interface of where the solution lies. We must turn away from the idea that all black is bad. All black students in a school doesn't make for bad schools. It is racist school boards, teachers, and administrators that make bad schools. All black residents living together in one neighborhood don't make a slum. It is the racism that condemns them to low income, unequal job opportunities, and high rates of unemployment that create slums. Blacks are becoming the majority in many of the larger cities of the country. Instead of thinking of this as a problem, we must turn this to our advantage and gain the economic and political opportunities it offers. This is where we must go. Going back to Africa is not the solution. A black Chicago can be just as great or greater than a white Chicago. A black mayor of Chicago can have just as much political clout as Mayor Daley. Black people must unite rather than dissipating their potential through integration. Black unity must be the rallying cry, not a soft plea for integration. That's my argument, and I'm willing to have a discussion about it. Any questions? Yes. Yes. Well, I'm not speaking about any. James is not the kind of community I'm talking about. And I'm talking about cities where you have schools that have all black children in them, and where the school system is dominated by white teachers, where it's controlled by a white school board and white administrators. Des Moines, Waterloo, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, these cities in Iowa. I think black children in cities like Ames get a good education because there aren't enough of them to make that difference. I'm speaking from experience because I've had 3 children in this system, and I have lived in Des Moines with one of my children going to the public school in Des Moines, and there's a big difference in the kind of education that a inner city school in Des Moines offered as far as the kind of education it got in Ames. Oh, no question about it. I think that ought to change too, but today I was talking about the black and white problem. Yes. Yes, I'm talking as a means to an end. I think, if we're really going to have equality of the races someday, that integration is not the means to obtain it. Because as long as it's, as I said, is at the sufferance of the majority, you're not going to get it. But if you, through separatism, get the economic and political power that puts you on an equal basis, then you don't have to ask for equality. You have it. Yes. Well, are you talking about Chicago, for example? I have no doubt that there are enough potential leaders in Chicago that they could run that city just as well if they had all of the other resources. Could run that city just as well as the white administration could run it. Perhaps even better, because I think it's kind of corrupt now. Wallace? Well, what's different? I'm not saying anything different, really.
No, I wasn't sure if you were. That's what I'm worried about.
No, I'm not.
You're talking about black people running the city of Chicago.
Well, if Chicago becomes 55% black, I think black people ought to.
Could. But as long as they're a minority, they have to really manipulate between.
I'm talking about those cities, and there are cities where well, North New Jersey is an example where there are more blacks than whites. Gary, Indiana is another example.
In the inner city of Washington.
Yes. Where they are the majority of the population, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that as a minority they have to take over those cities.
Yeah, well, then I guess you're talking about the same thing. I was afraid you were trying to say that somehow God has enough power as a majority to take over from, as a minority, to take over the majority.
I can't see that unless you have revolution. I'm not.
How do you do it in Waterloo? Where you got what is it, 12% black?
Well, I don't think you could get complete total power, but I see no reason why blacks should not be able to control the education of their children. Why not? The city is separated now. East and west, north and south, whatever the division is. Why couldn't they carve out a district and let that be their district, and black parents have control over the education? Because this is a big problem in Waterloo, blacks are going to be continually unhappy with that situation.
Well, it's his job to do, I mean, it needs a full revision of the institutions, as you replied earlier, because the institutions are not designed to have a black school system in Waterloo and a white school system in Waterloo. It's designed to have a school system in Waterloo, and presumably it's going to be providing quality opportunities. And it seems to me that in practical basis, you don't have to approximate quality in that system for the time being as an intelligent and unified minority.
Well, in that case, it would have to be the minority getting some indulgence from the majority. But it worries me that in this country that so many black children are not being educated. And it worries me that we're using the kinds of excuses that we're using, like busing. I just can't see busing solving the problem. Just the cost is too great, and there are just too many people to bus all around these cities.
No,
To me, they
very sensitive to say about that. I don't want to monopolize it, but I'm trying to think of a practical solution to the problem in a place like Waterloo, where you have a drastically a minority, and still you have areas that are up around 80, 90%. And those it seems to me that there must be some way for black people to get the kind of control you're talking about. And the system is still is going to be a white system.
so far in Waterloo, they've never been able to get a black. Well, they have a black on the school board now, but it's just been very recently they have a black on the school board. That's only 1 out of 7 school board members. He's not able to have much effect. Did you ever comment on that?
Yeah, I was thinking of it that in the Caribbean region, the situation is not exactly the same because in that situation, the white is the minority. And yet you find that as far as the people who in fact have most of the say or most power anyway, is in the long run economic power. And you find that although by virtue of the fact that you have majority that you have so-called political power belonging to that, but in fact we have very little economic power. And the paradox of the matter is who has the economic power. That's how
Do the blacks have political power?
yeah, they have so-called political power, but I think this is frustrated because of
Well, I agree. You have to have both because if a minority has the economic power, they can buy political power. So that makes it very difficult. I think both of them have to be in the same group. John, please, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think Dr. Ross already touched upon the comment that was made. Favor of black unity. And black unity actually means for achieving power and status in society. But let us face it, the blacks are and they will remain a minority in a democratic system.
segregation hasn't worked because, well, there are a number of reasons, but the reason I say black unity is the fact that there is existent in society today a belief that anything that is all black is bad. And I don't think that necessarily has to follow. I don't think an all-black school has to be bad. You know, if that were the case, Africans couldn't get an education. I don't think an all-black neighborhood has to be bad if people have enough income to buy homes and keep them up properly. I think slums are generated because of poverty. You have white slums in Europe. Europe has many white slums. That isn't because of race, it's because of poverty. So what I'm saying is that blacks have to unify to control some of these things that have such a great effect on them. Education being one. If they are the majority, I realize that in this country as a whole that we're always going to be a minority. But in a city, cities are approaching, there are several large cities now where blacks are the majority, but yet the white people control the political structure, the economic structure, the social structure. There's no reason for that. Take the South, historically, where blacks have been the majority in some cities and some counties, whites have had all of the political power. Blacks have had none. Take our national representation in Congress, for example. We represent 11% of the population, yet we have about 2% of the congressmen. I think in every office that blacks represent the majority of the population, they should be represented politically. And that's the kind of power that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about a minority taking over in a particular area. Yes. Any other comments or questions? Yes. Why not? Well, what's wrong with black? I don't see anything wrong. Pardon? Well, it's descriptive of the color. It's no more correct than white is, so that's not a very good argument if that's the route you're taking. Yes.
It's interesting that black culture that was derived from the North and they were speaking this concept of the words of culture. This was derived from this country for the last 100 years. The question I want to pose is just some comment on the recent development of the increased black community. This conflict in the last 2 months of the black self-identity, self-pride, and this is conversing with the perception that white is bad.
No, I don't think that follows.
I'm taking this as an answer.
Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think the term black is beautiful means anything other than that self-pride and developing an identity. Before, the connotation of black was bad. Black people didn't want to be called black because of the belief that was imposed on them that you had to strive to be more like white people. And the standards of beauty were the white standards.
How do blacks supposed to try to assimilate in the white
you know, that's what the white said. White said, well, if you'll only be more like us, we'll accept you. But that wasn't true. You had black people straightening their hair and using skin bleaches and things like that. But that didn't help them be more acceptable as whites.
I'm going to find really tell a long
I don't know if we can wait that long. Well, I don't know if, from where I stand, from where I observe black people now, integration is no longer, it doesn't have the same kind of appeal as it had 10 years ago. 10 years ago, everyone was happy with the concept of integration. Now the push is in the other direction. I'm not sure how far it's going to go. But at the present time, integration is not a viable goal for black Americans. That's not the way that the majority of them want to go. And why should it be? 1954, the Supreme Court said integrate the schools. 18 years later, they're still saying integrate the schools. That is clear evidence that white people don't want integration. So why should we want something that white people don't want? John, do you have another comment? John? Lost? Well, it's now being interpreted as an egalitarian doctrine. I'm talking about the original concept.
Originally it was, I agree with you, originally it was kingdom. White people primarily, it really wasn't black people. They were still slaves. But as it's now interpreted, the Constitution, I think, is a very good document for the
No, I don't deny that.
And so, if you could unite in terms of your own goals, and then if you could recruit the supporters, and place
probably, well, they're different in a sense, and probably the approach to them. For example, the American Indian never did want to become a part of the white society. He wanted to be separate from the very beginning. He never made this push for integration. He remained separate. The Mexican Americans, I'm really on very thin ice when I talk about them because I'm really not sure what their approach has been. I know more about the Indians than I do about them. But I think they probably want to maintain their own cultural identity and heritage also. But I certainly don't prescribe, setting off the Southwest for the Mexicans or the Northwest for the Indians. I think perhaps the best thing is for all of the minorities is to form some sort of coalition.
All minorities formulate themselves when they constitute
No, I don't think so. There aren't that very many Indians. Well, the blacks they're the largest majority in the country. There are 25 million blacks, and maybe 11 million Mexican Americans, and I think there are less than 1 million Indians. So we're talking about less than 40 million people. Well, I think if they could form a coalition and keep their goals separate, because I think they do have different goals in some respects, I think it would be possible to have some effect. I think the most important thing would be to get the political power that the numbers would generate, and perhaps some economic power. White politicians recognize this. For example, Indianapolis, Indiana, went to an all county-wide government because the blacks were becoming so numerous in Indianapolis that they were about to control city government. So they spread the government out to include the county, and now blacks are way in the minority again. This was, well, some blacks believe it anyway. It was just a method of dissipating their political power. Well, thank you very much. I didn't expect to convince you, but I hope it opened up some new trends of thought, because I don't think very many people have said what I've said today yet. I think you'll hear more of it later on, though. Thank you.